We're doing things a bit differently today. By differently, I mean that I'll be offering a more hands-on, practical dive into rhetoric, the third part of the trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. In other words, we'll explore the art of effective communication, the power of persuasive speech. This is a deeply philosophical topic with a long history of complex terms that have come down to us from ancient times, which likely explains why it's often overlooked in modern education. However, this discussion has far-reaching practical implications, so you'll need to pay extra attention to gain the full benefits. We're focusing on tools for effective communication, ways to express what lies beneath the surface of our thoughts, and to persuade others of the truths we hold. I urge you to actively engage with this material, even taking notes as we go along. If you've been following me for a while, you'll recognize that this is an updated version of an old lecture I gave as part of the Encyclopedia Hermetica series, which I've reworked for a broader audience with added visual aids. What I hope you take away from this isn't a collection of technical terms or fancy jargon, though if you internalize these, it'll benefit you, but rather the ability to critically apply these rhetorical techniques to the many voices shaping our world. Whether they belong to politicians, news anchors, workplace leaders, self-help gurus, religious figures, academics, or activists. This is not about cultivating cynicism, but about developing sharp, discerning minds, capable of navigating and understanding the complex world of modern communication and its many tricks. My aim is not to breed cynicism, but to foster healthy skepticism, a crucial component of free thought, especially in an era where skepticism and cynicism are often confused. Skepticism isn't about inherent mistrust, but about approaching situations with a clear mind and rational thought. Our minds aren't isolated. They are shaped by an amalgamation of truths and falsehoods that we absorb over time. It's important to critically analyze these influences with objectivity. Think of the trivium, with rhetoric as its final piece, as a kind of mental decontamination chamber. Just as a scientist must recognize and manage external contaminants to ensure accurate results, so must we filter out false influences to think clearly. The cleaner your mental slate, the less likely you are to let misleading influences cloud your judgment. Rhetoric, like lockpicking or martial arts, is a skill, morally neutral, entirely dependent on how it's used. We can break rhetoric down into categories, much like we do with logic, which is a favorite activity for those obsessed with language. These categories, think of them as the heartstrings of good rhetoric, are essential for a skilled rhetorician to manipulate. They're like the four humors of rhetoric, and a skilled speaker, much like a physician of the soul, knows how to balance them for the best effect. These four key elements are logos, the appeal to reason. By presenting logical ideas, a speaker connects to the audience's rational side. A reasonable exchange of ideas creates harmony and hopefully reveals truth. Pathos, the appeal to emotion. This is what we often refer to as acting. By stirring emotions through tone, facial expressions, gestures, and dramatic pauses, speakers create an emotional connection with their audience. Ethos, the appeal to credibility. It's about establishing trust through the speaker's integrity and authority, resonating with shared values or beliefs, and creating a sense of moral character that earns respect. Kairos, the appeal to timeliness. This is about striking the right moment for an argument to have maximum impact, knowing when to present your message at just the right time for it to resonate. Now let's get into some practical techniques, drawn from the works of classical rhetoricians like Cicero and Aristotle. Though rhetoric has ancient roots, its relevance remains just as powerful today, especially in a world saturated by persuasive speech. Whether in politics, marketing, or media, The key is to recognize these rhetorical techniques in action and understand how they influence us. For example, anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. It creates rhythm and emphasis, making a message more memorable and emotionally stirring. Consider Martin Luther King Jr.'s iconic "I have a dream" speech, or Shakespeare's "Mad World, Mad Kings." These repetitions resonate deeply with audiences and stay with them long after the speech ends. Climax is another powerful tool. This involves building intensity through the repetition of words, each one more powerful than the last. For example, the famous line, "Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," builds to a final, impactful conclusion. This technique often helps to frame ideas in a hierarchy of importance, subtly guiding the audience toward a desired outcome. Antithesis is the art of contrast, where opposing ideas are juxtaposed to highlight differences. This can create strong emotional responses by emphasizing what's at stake, as seen in the famous line, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." We also have Persuasion, where two clauses mirror each other in structure, creating balance and harmony. This is often used in slogans or memorable statements, such as JFK's, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Chiasmos, another rhetorical device, involves reversing the structure of two phrases. Like the famous "When the going gets tough, the tough get going." This creates a sense of symmetry and impact. Lastly, techniques like isocolon, where clauses mirror each other not only in structure but also in syllable count, further sharpen the precision and balance of the message. As we continue, I encourage you to reflect on how these rhetorical strategies play out in everyday life. From political speeches to advertisements and even social media posts. By mastering these techniques, you'll be able to recognize when they're being used on you, empowering you to make more informed decisions in a world full of persuasive voices. This technique, similar to a rhythmic word dance, can be seen in sayings like, "To err is human, to forgive divine." Both parts are balanced not only in meaning, but also in rhythm. I have a few examples on my list, such as homoioptoton and homoioteluton, which are primarily relevant to inflected languages like Greek and Latin, where words with similar endings are grouped together for effect. Take this Latin example, "O fortunatam natam me consule Romam," roughly translated as, "Oh, lucky day for Rome, the day of my great consulate." While it's difficult to replicate exactly in English, it highlights the elegance and rhythm such structures can bring to language. Although English doesn't naturally fit these forms, the concept of creating rhythmic harmony in speech remains a powerful tool for orators. Next, let's discuss alliteration, a technique that surprisingly was not highly regarded in ancient rhetorical guides. The ancient Greeks actually saw it as a stylistic mistake to be avoided, but the Romans loved it and passed that appreciation down to us. This is why the term alliteration comes from a Latin root rather than a Greek one. A famous example of excessive alliteration in Latin is "Otite tute tati, tibi tanta, tyrana, tu listi." "O tyrant, Titus Tatius, you alone took up those terrible troubles." I don't need to go into great detail, since all high school students learn about alliteration in their poetry classes. It's when several words with the same initial consonant sound are placed together for effect. Let me give you some examples to illustrate the power of alliteration. TikTok, Dunkin' Donuts, PayPal, Best Buy, Coca-Cola, American Apparel, Chuck E. Cheese, Bed Bath & Beyond, Krispy Kreme, Lululemon, TED Talk, Weight Watchers, BlackBerry, and Teetly. As you can see, this type of word magic is everywhere in modern capitalism. It's fascinating that something once considered a rhetorical blunder over 2 millennia ago is now so widely used. Moving on, we have one of your dad's favorite rhetorical figures, rhetoranomasia, a fancy term for wordplay or puns, though not always meant to be humorous. Puns exploit the multiple meanings of a word or words that sound alike, often for a comedic or rhetorical effect. You can find examples ranging from Shakespeare's "a little more than kin and less than kind" to modern phrases like "atheism is a non-profit institution," or dad jokes like "this breakfast is excellent." I'm sure you can think of many cringeworthy puns, and if you can't, just ask your dad. But puns aren't just a form of wordplay. They have deep historical roots, going back to ancient writing systems like Sumerian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs, which often relied on puns. Puns play a vital role in the evolution of written language, and by extension, civilization. Understanding a pun requires cognitive flexibility and cultural or linguistic knowledge, as the reader must hold 2 meanings in mind simultaneously. This skill can be both stimulating and enjoyable, and it also serves as a gauge for language proficiency and cultural assimilation. In fact, puns have been used by authors, poets, and playwrights throughout history to add depth to their works. They not only provide comic relief, but can highlight a character's wit or intelligence, and even introduce double meanings. A classic example of a pun occurs in Homer's Odyssey, when Odysseus tells the Cyclops Polyphemus that his name is Autis, meaning nobody or no one, which also resembles the name Odysseus. When Polyphemus is hurt, he cries out that nobody is hurting him, causing confusion among the other Cyclopes. This clever use of a pun serves as a brilliant example of paranomasia. There's also a unique pun type known as figura etymologica, which is my personal favorite. This involves using words that share a common etymological root, often adding subtlety and depth. For example, the Bible verse, "Who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator," involves a figura etymologica, since creature and creator share the same root. Similarly, Tennyson's line, "There hath he lain for ages, and will lie," plays on the shared root of lain and lie. In the Hermetic book of 6 Principles of Things, there is a subtle figura etymologica in the line, "Nature is a certain universal and special vigor, born of cause and reason, first born in heaven, where natura, nature, and nascens, nascitur, born, birth, share a common root, although this nuance is lost in translation." Moving along, the next figure is polyptoton, where a word is repeated in various forms or cases. This is more applicable to inflected languages than to English. For example, in Latin, the phrase "vim vi repellere licet," "it is permitted to repel force with force," shows this beautifully. An English example might be "a man's man," using "man" twice in different cases. This figure isn't as strong in English, but it's worth noting because catchy phrases or slogans often trick people into accepting ideas without critical analysis. Next, let's look at zeugma, a term from Greek meaning yoke, which involves using one verb for multiple ideas within a sentence. An example from Tennyson's Ulysses is, "It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth, among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I meet and dole unequal laws unto a savage race, that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me." Here, the verb meet applies to both subjects, but in different senses. There's also silepsis, a variant of zeugma that introduces irony or humor by using a word in two different ways in the same sentence. Anadiplosis, which repeats a word for emotional impact, is a rhetorical device often used by public speakers to evoke serious emotions. A famous example is Dylan Thomas's rage against the dying of the light, where rage is repeated to create a sense of intensity and determination. Another example from Yoda is fear leads to anger leads to hate leads to suffering. This repetition links ideas in a flowing chain. Synonymia, or stylized tautology, repeats a concept using different words to emphasize or clarify an idea. An example is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where the plebs are called blocks, stones, worse than senseless things, each word adding emotional weight to the notion of worthlessness. This technique is useful for reinforcing a message, adding both emotional and intellectual depth. Anti-metabola, a personal favorite of mine, reverses a phrase to mirror its structure and provide deeper insight. A classic example is, "You should eat to live, not live to eat." The reversed structure emphasizes the importance of priorities in life. Temesis, derived from the Greek for to cut, splits a word for emphasis. A vulgar example is unfucking believable. It's often used to add drama and force to language. Preteritio, often used by politicians, emphasizes something by claiming to avoid mentioning it. This rhetorical maneuver subtly draws attention to a subject by pretending to ignore it. Cicero frequently used preteritio in his speeches, drawing attention to the very things he claimed not to mention. Metaphor, allegory, and irony, which you're undoubtedly familiar with, are also important tools in rhetoric. And then there's onomatopoeia, not just for comic book sounds like boom or pow, but any invented word, such as supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, that serves a particular purpose in discourse. We also have metonymy, using a word related to something to refer to it, e.g., my ride for my car, and synecdocio, a type of metonymy where part stands for the whole, e.g., my wheels for my car. Finally, we reach hyperbole, an intentional exaggeration to make a point. While hyperbole can be humorous or dramatic, it can also distort reality, which is problematic when used in serious contexts like politics or news.